Okay, I have today a discussion about what producers and consumers are and the role that those play in the environment. This is a relatively short lecture, and then there's some questions for you to answer. Make sure you are taking notes in your notebooks. Those notebooks are phenomenal resources for you by the time that the next assessment rolls around. So make sure that what we do on hybrid days is getting into those notebooks. So today we're going to talk about producers and consumers. By the end of this lesson, I want you to be able to differentiate between the different types of producers and consumers, as well as explain the different ways that energy flows between them. So we're going to start off where energy starts off with producers. Primary producers are the first producers of energy-rich compounds that are later used by organisms. These are our plants and other things that can make you energy that we can use out of energy that we can't use. So these are called autotrophs. They use solar and chemical energy to produce food by assembling inorganic compounds into organic molecules. So we talked about our biological macromolecules in biochemistry. Essentially, these plants and bacteria and anything that can take chemical energy or solar energy and make them into carbohydrates and other energy rich compounds. So there are two main ways that autotrophs get energy, with solar energy and chemical energy. So we've talked about solar energy a lot before. Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process by which organisms capture light energy and use it to power chemical reactions that convert carbon dioxide into water and oxygen, or carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and energy-rich carbohydrates like sugars and starches. So we've got light coming in and water going in and carbon dioxide going in. We've got oxygen going out as a byproduct, and we've got these carbohydrates stored in here. So we take the water and the carbon dioxide and we use light energy to make carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates, when we make those, we have an excess of oxygen. So photosynthesis, using light energy, carbon dioxide and water to make carbohydrates. But there's another type of another type of process that autotrophs undergo, or can undergo, and that is called chemosynthesis. So we started with photosynthesis, and now we have chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis is the process by which chemical energy is used to produce carbohydrates. So this doesn't happen as often as photosynthesis happens, but it still does happen, usually in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean where there is no light for photosynthesis to happen. And usually on like deep sea volcanic vents or hot springs. So if you think about this mussel on the seafloor, it can't get light from the sun, so it has to find another way to create sugars or to create food. Essentially, they take water and oxygen and hydrogen sulfide from these deep sea hydrothermal vents, and they take that and they change the carbon dioxide and the water um, into sugars. So C6H12O6 is essentially just glucose. It's the same exact sugar that plants make. And then we have, instead of oxygen as our byproduct, this sulfur compound as our byproduct. So when we don't have sunlight to make our own energy and we don't have access to eat things that do have access to sunlight, organisms create a new pathway, and that is through chemosynthesis. Now, we talked about producers, and we also have consumers. Consumers are organisms that rely on other organisms for energy and nutrients, whether that be producers or other consumers. Consumers can't make energy themselves, so they have to eat. And instead of autotrophs, we have heterotrophs. Heterotrophs must acquire energy from other heterotrophs or autotrophs by ingesting them one way or another. So everything from these pandas, foxes, to mushrooms and worms, they cannot make their own food. They have to consume their own food. And there are a bunch of different types of consumers. The first one we're going to talk about is carnivores. Carnivores eat and kill other animals, and they only eat other animals. So carnivores are meat eaters and only meat eaters. So we've got our big jungle cats, giant sea otters are considered carnivores. Hyenas, snakes are all carnivorous. They all only eat other animals. They all only eat meat. We also have herbivores. Herbivores are consumers that obtain energy and nutrients from plants and plants only. So this koala that exists solely on a diet of eucalyptus, to birds who usually eat who can eat like leaves and seeds, cows, caterpillars, deer, horses, they are all herbivores. They do not eat meat, they only eat plants. We also have omnivores. Omnivores obtain energy from both plants and animals. So we, unless you are vegan, are considered omnivores. We eat both meat and plants. And so are all of these critters down here. So these are the three that people usually talk about: carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores. They eat meat, they eat plants, or they eat both. But there are three more that we are going to kind of add to this definition of consumer. The first one being scavengers. So scavengers consume the carcasses of already dead animals. So carnivores usually do the killing themselves. Scavengers scavengers consume carcasses of already dead animals. So when you think about scavengers, most likely we think of these kind of predatory bird looking things, the hawks and what's the word? Anyway, the name of them is escaping me. Vultures, that's what it is. These vultures only eat the carcasses of animals that are killed, usually by other animals, sometimes by us with our cars. And then flies can also eat the carcasses of dead animals. Piranhas are also considered scavengers. They don't necessarily do the killing, but they will eat already dead meat. We also have decomposers. Decomposers chemically break down organic matter. So if something dies, or like even if leaves fall to the ground, decomposers chemically break that down or chemically break that down to get the energy from it. So when we think about decomposers, it's usually things like fungi, mushrooms, and bacteria. And this last little category is one of my favorites. They are detritivores. Detritivores feed on detritus. Detritus is the organic matter produced by the decomposition of organisms. So whatever's left after the decomposers get done with their consumption of energy and nutrients, that is when the detritivores come in. They feed on detritus, as well as the decomposers that live on in the detritus particles. So if any of these fungi or any of these bacteria are still in this detritus, the detritivores will eat them as well. This is where we get things like earthworms and slugs and these little krill shrimp things, mites, crabs. Those are all considered detritivores. They feed on organic matter produced by the decomposition of organisms. So those are 6 categories of consumers. There are just a couple more key points that I want to cover. As much as human beings like to put things into categories, we talked about this a lot with abiotic and biotic factors. Essentially, as much as we try to put things into neat categories, life doesn't always like to fit into those categories. For example, herbivores can isolate themselves to only one type of plant. So, like the koala only eats eucalyptus, but we don't call it like a eucalyptusvore. Some birds only eat seeds. That is misspelled. um, and some animals only eat leaves. Um, Another little caveat is that hyenas, while mostly categorized as carnivores, if they need to, um, they can eat. They can scavenge as well. So if they can't find anything to kill and eat, they will just eat whatever is laying around. Also, many sea creatures will eat a mixture of algae, bits of animal carcass, and detritus particles, just whatever's around. So, this is why it's important to understand that sometimes everything isn't as simple as it seems. That biology is a lot more complex than we give it credit for. Um, and yeah, so make sure that you are answering the questions that go along with this assignment. And if you have any questions, please let me know.